The days that followed felt like a blur to Lily. The quiet, predictable rhythm of her life had been shattered, replaced by a whirlwind of interviews, court dates, and whispered conversations among neighbors. News of Evelyn's death spread quickly through Willow Creek, leaving the small town reeling. People who had known Evelyn for decades struggled to reconcile the kind, generous woman they remembered with the shocking truth about how she had died. For Lily, it was even harder. Everywhere she went, she felt eyes on her, some curious, some pitying, others judgmental. Mrs. Thompson became Lily's anchor during those turbulent weeks. True to her word, she took the young girl in without hesitation, opening her home and heart to her. Her cozy house, filled with warm colors and soft furniture, provided a safe haven from the storm raging outside. Every night, Mrs. Thompson would sit with Lily at the kitchen table, sipping hot cocoa and talking about anything but the case. Sometimes, they'd laugh over silly stories from Evelyn's younger years. Other times, they'd sit in comfortable silence, simply existing together. It wasn't much, but it gave Lily something to hold on to when everything else felt uncertain. Despite Mrs. Thompson's kindness, though, Lily couldn't escape the weight of what had happened. School was particularly difficult. Friends who used to wave hello now avoided her gaze, unsure of what to say. Teachers treated her with awkward sympathy, offering extensions on assignments and asking if she needed extra support. While their intentions were good, it only made Lily feel more isolated. She didn't want special treatment. She just wanted things to go back to normal. But deep down, she knew that wasn't possible. Nothing would ever be the same again. The trial loomed large over everything, casting a shadow that seemed impossible to escape. Lawyers came and went, asking Lily to recount the events of that fateful evening over and over again. At first, she found it exhausting, reliving the pain of her father's betrayal each time. But as the weeks passed, she began. The small town of Willow Creek was quiet that morning, its streets lined with autumn leaves that crunched underfoot. The sky was a dull gray, matching the mood of everyone gathered at St. Mary's Church for Evelyn Harper's funeral. Evelyn had been the heart of the community, a warm, kind woman who always had a plate of cookies ready or a listening ear when someone needed advice. Her sudden death shocked the entire town, leaving many unanswered questions. Lily Harper sat in the front pew, her small hands gripping a worn teddy bear she'd had since she was little. It smelled faintly of lavender, just like her grandmother's house. She glanced around nervously, feeling out of place among the adults dressed in black. Her dad, Mark, sat beside her, his face pale and drawn. He hadn't said much since they arrived, but Lily could tell he wasn't okay. His jaw was clenched tight, and his eyes darted around the room as if searching for something or avoiding it. The church was filled with familiar faces, Aunt Susan dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, Uncle Greg staring blankly ahead, Cousin Jake tapping his foot impatiently against the wooden floor. Even Mrs. Thompson, Evelyn's best friend, looked lost without her companion by her side. But there was an odd tension in the air, a heaviness that didn't feel quite right for a funeral. People whispered to each other behind cupped hands, their voices low but urgent. "Do you think it's true?" One person murmured. "I heard it wasn't natural," another replied. Lily strained to hear more, but the organ music started up again, drowning out the gossip. Pastor Allen stepped forward to begin the service, his voice calm and steady. "Today we gather to honor the life of Evelyn Harper, a remarkable woman who touched so many hearts." As he spoke, Lily tried to focus on the memories of her grandmother, baking cookies together, reading bedtime stories, planting flowers in the garden. But her mind kept drifting back to those whispers. What weren't people saying? She turned to look at her dad again. He sat stiffly, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. When the pastor invited family members to share a few words, Lily saw her dad hesitate. For a moment, she thought he might stand up, but instead, he shook his head slightly and leaned back in his seat. Something about his reaction made her stomach twist. Why wouldn't he speak about Grandma? Didn't he have anything to say? As the ceremony continued, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, not just with her dad, but with everyone. Aunt Susan avoided making eye contact with anyone, especially Uncle Greg, who seemed unusually fidgety. Cousin Jake kept checking his phone, as if he couldn't wait to leave. And Mrs. Thompson, usually so cheerful, muttered quietly to herself while wiping away tears. None of it added up. By the time the service ended, Lily felt more confused than ever. Everyone filed out of the church silently, heading toward the cemetery for the burial. The wind picked up, sending a chill through the crowd. Lily clutched her teddy bear even tighter, wishing her grandmother were still here to explain what was going on. Little did she know, the answers would come soon, and they would change everything. Months passed, and the small town of Willow Creek began to heal in its own quiet way. The scandal surrounding Evelyn's death became a somber chapter in the community's history, whispered about less frequently as time went on. For Lily, life slowly started to settle into a new rhythm. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but there was a sense of stability she hadn't felt in a long time. Mrs. Thompson officially became her legal guardian, and together they worked to create a home filled with warmth and love. Every day, Lily reminded herself how lucky she was to have someone like Mrs. Thompson in her corner. School remained challenging at first. While some classmates had warmed up to her again, others still kept their distance, unsure of what to say or do. But Lily didn't let it bother her too much anymore. Instead, she threw herself into her studies and extracurricular activities, determined to focus on building a brighter future. She joined the school's art club, where she discovered a talent for painting. Using bold colors and sweeping brushstrokes, she created pieces inspired by memories of her grandmother, the vibrant flower garden, the cozy study, the endless cups of lavender tea. Each painting felt like a tribute, a way to keep Evelyn alive in her heart. Mrs. Thompson encouraged Lily to share her story whenever she felt ready. "Your voice matters," she would say gently. "What you did took incredible courage. Don't ever forget that." At first, Lily resisted the idea. Talking about what happened still brought tears to her eyes, and she worried people might judge her for exposing her own family. But one evening, during a community gathering at the local library, she decided to speak up. Standing before a small audience, she talked about her grandmother's kindness, the secrets she uncovered, and the importance of seeking truth, even when it's painful. To her surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. Neighbors approached her afterward, thanking her for her bravery and sharing stories of how Evelyn had touched their lives. Some even admitted they had suspected something wasn't right, but hadn't known what to do. Hearing their words made Lily realize she wasn't alone in her grief or in her determination to make things better. As the months turned into a year, Lily found ways to honor her grandmother beyond just painting. With Mrs. Thompson's help, she organized a memorial garden in Evelyn's name at the town park. Volunteers came together to plant flowers, lay pathways, and install a bench engraved with Evelyn's favorite quote, "Truth is the light that guides us through the darkest times." On the day of the unveiling, Lily stood beside Mrs. Thompson, watching as friends, family, and strangers gathered to pay their respects. It was a bittersweet moment, but also deeply healing. Through it all, Lily learned valuable lessons about resilience, forgiveness, and the power of speaking out. She understood now that not every problem could be solved easily, and not everyone would understand her choices. But she also knew that doing the right thing often meant making tough decisions, even when they hurt. Her actions had exposed painful truths, yes, but they had also sparked important conversations about trust, accountability, and justice within her community. One crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves swirled around her feet, Lily visited the memorial garden alone. Sitting on the bench, she closed her eyes and imagined her grandmother sitting beside her, smiling proudly. "I miss you, Grandma," she whispered, clutching the worn teddy bear tightly. "But I'm okay. I promise." And for the first time since everything had happened, she truly believed it. Life wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But Lily had learned to carry her scars with grace, turning them into reminders of her strength. As the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of lavender, she smiled softly. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was ready to face it, one step at a time. After the somber ceremony at the cemetery, the family and close friends made their way back to Evelyn's house. It was a cozy two-story home filled with memories, photos on the walls, knickknacks on shelves, and the faint scent of lavender lingering in every room. The atmosphere was heavy, but people tried to busy themselves by sorting through Evelyn's belongings. Boxes were brought out, and everyone took turns packing away her things. Lily wandered off to the side, feeling restless. She didn't want to help pack. It felt wrong to put her grandmother's life into boxes, as if she could be neatly tucked away. Instead, she found herself drawn to Evelyn's study, a small, quiet room that had always been her favorite place in the house. The study smelled like old books and pencil shavings, just as she remembered. Her grandmother used to sit at the desk, writing letters or jotting down notes, while Lily colored quietly nearby. Curious, Lily began looking around. On one shelf, there were stacks of photo albums, recipe books, and notebooks tied together with ribbon. Beneath them, she noticed something unusual, a leather-bound diary partially hidden under a pile of papers. Her heart skipped a beat. She'd never seen this before. Carefully, she pulled it out and flipped it open. The pages were filled with her grandmother's neat handwriting, dates, thoughts, reminders, and even doodles of flowers in the margins. As Lily skimmed through the entries, her eyes widened. Some of the notes seemed strange. One entry mentioned an argument Evelyn had overheard between Mark, Lily's dad, and Aunt Susan. Another talked about how Evelyn felt uneasy around certain family members lately. There were lines like, "I don't know who to trust anymore," and "if anything happens to me, don't believe what they say." Goosebumps prickled Lily's arms. What did Grandma mean? And why would she write such things? Lily sat down in the chair at the desk, completely absorbed in the diary. She read about times when Evelyn had confronted her son, Mark, asking him difficult questions. Apparently, he'd been acting secretive, avoiding conversations about finances, and making excuses whenever Evelyn pressed him for details. In another entry, Evelyn wrote about Susan visiting late one night, looking nervous and saying something about fixing the problem. None of it made sense, but it all sounded suspicious. Outside the study, the noise of the others drifted in, boxes being moved, hushed conversations, the occasional clink of teacups. But inside, Lily felt like she was uncovering a mystery no one else knew about. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was Grandma worried about money? Did someone take advantage of her? Or was there something darker going on? She paused when she came across a particularly chilling line. "Mark came by today, acting strangely. I fear he's hiding something terrible." Lily's breath caught in her throat. Her dad? Hiding something terrible. She couldn't imagine what it could be, but the words sent a chill down her spine. For a moment, she considered showing the diary to someone. Mrs. Thompson, maybe, or even her dad himself. But something stopped her. If what Grandma wrote was true, then whoever was involved might not want this diary to be found. Clutching the book tightly, Lily slipped it into her bag. She needed to think, to figure out what to do next. As she left the study, she glanced around the house again. Everyone seemed so normal, so focused on their tasks. But now, Lily saw them differently. Every smile looked forced, every laugh hollow. Even her own father, who was helping load boxes into his car, seemed distant and distracted. For the first time in her young life, Lily realized that sometimes the people closest to you can hold secrets too big to comprehend. And as much as she wanted to ignore the diary and pretend everything was fine, she knew she couldn't. Whatever truth lay within those pages, it was up to her to uncover it and face whatever consequences came with it. As the afternoon wore on, the house grew quieter. Most of the family members had finished their tasks and retreated to the living room, where they sat in clusters, sipping tea and exchanging polite but strained conversation. Lily stayed in the corner of the room, pretending to flip through an old photo album while clutching her bag tightly. Inside it was the diary she'd found earlier, its weight both comforting and unsettling. She couldn't stop thinking about what she'd read. Her grandmother's cryptic warnings, the arguments, the uneasy tone that hinted at something far more sinister than anyone seemed willing to admit. Her mind raced as she tried to piece everything together. Why would her dad be acting strangely? What problem had Aunt Susan mentioned in the diary? And why did Grandma feel like she couldn't trust her own family? The questions swirled in her head, making it hard to focus. Every laugh from the other room sounded fake. Every glance between relatives felt loaded with hidden meaning. Even the air in the house seemed heavier now, pressing down on her shoulders. Unable to sit still any longer, Lily slipped out of the living room and headed back to the study. She needed space to think, and maybe find more answers. The room was dimly lit, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the desk. She pulled out the diary again and flipped to a section she hadn't fully read yet. This time, the entries were even darker. Evelyn wrote about overhearing bits of conversations, snippets of plans involving money, legal documents, and hushed disagreements. One line stood out. "Mark says we need to act fast before things get worse. I don't know if I can keep quiet anymore." Lily's hands trembled as she read those words. Her dad wasn't just hiding something. He was part of whatever was going on. But what exactly? Was it about Grandma's will, money troubles, or something else entirely? The thought of her father being involved in anything shady made her stomach churn. He was strict sometimes, sure, and often stressed about work, but he'd always been her rock. Could he really have done something bad? She kept reading, desperate for clarity. Another entry revealed that Evelyn had confronted Mark directly, demanding to know what he was up to. His response, according to the diary, was vague and evasive. "It's complicated, Mom," he'd said. "You wouldn't understand." Those words haunted Lily. Complicated how? Why wouldn't Grandma understand? The more she read, the angrier she became, not just at her dad, but at everyone who might have been keeping secrets. Suddenly, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the study. Panicking, Lily shoved the diary back into her bag and turned toward the door, trying to look casual. It was Aunt Susan, carrying a box of old magazines. She gave Lily a quick smile before setting the box down on the desk. "What are you doing in here, sweetie?" she asked, her voice light but forced. "I just wanted to see some of Grandma's stuff," Lily stammered, avoiding eye contact. Susan nodded slowly, glancing around the room. For a moment, Lily thought she might say something else, but instead, she picked up the box and left without another word. As soon as she was gone, Lily let out a shaky breath. Something about Susan's presence made her skin crawl. Maybe it was the way she looked at the desk, almost as if she were searching for something. Or maybe it was the nagging feeling that Susan knew more than she was letting on. Determined not to lose her nerve, Lily zipped up her bag and headed back to the living room. She needed to figure out what to do next. Confronting her dad felt impossible. He'd never admit anything in front of everyone. Telling Mrs. Thompson crossed her mind, but what if she didn't believe her? No, Lily decided she had to handle this herself. Whatever truth lay buried in the diary, she was going to expose it, even if it meant shaking the entire family apart. For now, though, she had to play it cool. Sitting quietly in the corner, she watched as her relatives laughed and chatted, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her. Each passing minute felt like hours, but Lily held her ground. She wasn't just a scared little girl anymore. She was Evelyn Harper's granddaughter, and she was ready to fight for the truth. The arrival of the police transformed Evelyn's quiet home into a scene of controlled chaos. Red and blue lights flashed outside, casting eerie shadows through the windows as officers moved methodically through the house. Questions were asked, statements were taken, and evidence was collected. Lily sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket someone had thoughtfully draped over her shoulders, watching as her world unraveled before her eyes. Mark and Susan were led to separate corners of the room, each speaking in hushed tones to detectives who scribbled notes furiously. Mark looked like a man caught in quicksand, his shoulders slumped, his face pale, his hands trembling as he tried to explain himself. It wasn't supposed to happen this way, he kept repeating, his voice hollow with regret. But no matter how many times he said it, the words offered no absolution. Susan, on the other hand, seemed to crumble under the weight of her guilt. Her sobs echoed through the room as she recounted the details of their plan. She admitted to tampering with Evelyn's medication, claiming she'd only done what Mark instructed. "I didn't want to hurt her," she cried, clutching a tissue until it tore apart in her hands. "She was my mother-in-law, for God's sake. I loved her too." Lily listened to their confessions with a mixture of anger and disbelief. How could they sit there and defend themselves after what they'd done? Didn't they realize the pain they had caused, not just to Evelyn, but to everyone who cared about her? Mrs. Thompson sat nearby, shaking her head in silence, tears streaming down her face. Even Jake and Greg, usually so detached, looked visibly shaken by the revelations. As the investigation continued, officers began searching the house for additional evidence. They confiscated the diary, labeling it as a key piece of the puzzle. One officer gently approached Lily, kneeling down to meet her eye level. "You did the right thing by calling us," he said softly, offering her a reassuring smile. "Your grandmother would be proud of you." Though his words were meant to comfort her, they only made Lily cry harder. She buried her face in her hands, overwhelmed by the enormity of everything that had happened. For weeks, maybe even months, her family had been living a lie. And now that the truth was out, nothing would ever be the same again. Eventually, Mark and Susan were handcuffed and led outside to separate police cars. As Mark passed by Lily, he stopped for a moment, his expression pained. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I never wanted to hurt you." But Lily didn't respond. She couldn't bring herself to look at him, let alone forgive him. Instead, she stared straight ahead, focusing on the rhythmic flashing of the police lights outside. Each pulse of red and blue felt like a heartbeat, a reminder that life went on, even when it felt like hers had shattered. Once the suspects were taken away, the officers turned their attention to the rest of the family. They asked questions about Evelyn's final days, piecing together a timeline of events. Mrs. Thompson spoke up, sharing memories of Evelyn's concerns in the weeks leading up to her death. She mentioned feeling unwell, Mrs. Thompson recalled, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. But she brushed it off, saying it was probably stress or old age. Looking back now, I wonder if she suspected something. When the questioning finally ended, the house fell eerily silent. The crowd of relatives dispersed slowly, some heading home, others lingering uncertainly near the door. Lily remained seated on the couch, staring blankly at the empty space where her father had stood just moments ago. The weight of the evening pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Mrs. Thompson approached her cautiously, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Lily, dear," she said softly, "you've been so brave today. But you don't have to go through this alone. Let me take care of you, okay?" For the first time since calling 911, Lily nodded. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing. She couldn't face it without help. And as Mrs. Thompson wrapped an arm around her and led her toward the car, Lily allowed herself a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to heal, even after everything that had been lost. The room was in complete disarray, voices overlapping in a cacophony of shock and anger. Tears streamed down faces, hands gestured wildly, and accusations flew like arrows. Lily sat frozen at the table, her small frame overwhelmed by the chaos swirling around her. The diary lay open in front of her, its pages trembling slightly as if even it couldn't bear the weight of what had been revealed. Her father's confession hung heavy in the air. And for a moment, it felt like time itself had stopped. "Mark, how could you?" Mrs. Thompson demanded, her voice shaking with equal parts grief and fury. "Evelyn trusted you. She loved you more than anything." Mark buried his face in his hands, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "I didn't have a choice," he mumbled, though the words sounded hollow even to him. "The business. I was drowning. I thought if I could get the inheritance sooner, I could fix everything." "You don't kill someone over money," Jake snapped, slamming his fist on the table. His usual aloof demeanor had vanished, replaced by raw emotion. "Do you realize what you've done? You killed Grandma." Susan sobbed uncontrollably, her head resting on her arms. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she choked out between tears. "We just wanted to hurry things along. We never meant for her to suffer." "But she did suffer," Lily cried, her voice cracking under the weight of her pain. All eyes turned to her, and for the first time, the adults seemed to remember she was there. Her tiny frame shook with anger and sadness, but her eyes burned with determination. Grandma wrote about feeling scared and confused. She knew something was wrong, but none of you cared enough to tell her the truth. Her words cut through the noise like a knife, silencing everyone. Mark looked at his daughter, guilt etched into every line of his face. "Lily," he began, reaching out toward her, but she pulled away sharply. "Don't touch me," she shouted, surprising even herself with the force of her own voice. "You lied to me. You lied to Grandma. You ruined everything." The tension in the room grew unbearable. Uncle Greg stood abruptly, pacing back and forth as he muttered curses under his breath. "This is insane," he said finally, running a hand through his hair. "We're not criminals. We can't handle this ourselves. We need to call the police." "No." Mark shot up from his chair, panic flashing across his face. "If we call them, they'll arrest us. They'll take Lily away. They'll destroy our family." "They already destroyed it," Jake retorted, glaring at his uncle. "You think keeping quiet will make this better? Newsflash, it won't." For a brief second, Lily considered agreeing with her dad. Maybe calling the police would make things worse. Maybe they could still find a way to fix this themselves. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. Secrets like these didn't stay hidden forever, and pretending nothing happened wouldn't bring her grandmother back. Someone had to pay for what they'd done. Before anyone else could argue, Lily grabbed her phone from her pocket and dialed 911. Her hands trembled so badly, she almost dropped it, but she forced herself to press each number carefully. When the operator answered, she took a shaky breath and said, "My grandma. She didn't die naturally. My dad and aunt, they admitted to poisoning her." The room went deathly silent. Everyone stared at her, their faces pale with shock. Mark lunged forward, trying to grab the phone, but Lily sidestepped him, holding it high above her head. "Don't," she warned, her voice firm despite the tears streaming down her cheeks. "This isn't right, Dad. Grandma deserved better." Defeated, Mark sank back into his chair, burying his face in his hands again. Susan let out a wail of despair, while Mrs. Thompson clutched her chest as if the weight of the revelation might crush her. Outside, the sound of sirens grew louder, cutting through the quiet evening air. As the police arrived and began questioning everyone, Lily stood apart from the group, clutching the diary tightly to her chest. She felt drained, heartbroken, and utterly alone, but also, strangely, relieved. The truth had come out, no matter how painful it was. And though she didn't know what the future held, she knew one thing for certain. She had done the right thing. As the evening settled in, the mood in Evelyn's house shifted slightly. The heaviness of the day lingered, but the family tried to lighten it with small talk and shared memories. Plates of food were brought out, homemade casseroles, sandwiches, and desserts prepared by neighbors who wanted to offer comfort. Lily sat at the dining table, picking at a plate of macaroni salad without really eating it. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying the diary entries over and over again. She couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was sitting right there in the room with them, hidden behind polite smiles and careful words. Her dad, Mark, was seated across from her, looking exhausted. He hadn't said much since they returned from the cemetery, but every now and then, he'd glance around the table as if gauging everyone's reactions. Aunt Susan sat beside him, nervously stirring her tea even though it had gone cold. Uncle Greg leaned back in his chair, scrolling through his phone, while Cousin Jake tapped his fingers on the table, clearly bored. Mrs. Thompson sat quietly near the end of the table, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. To an outsider, it might have looked like a typical family gathering after a loss, but to Lily, it felt like a ticking time bomb. The silence stretched thin until finally, someone broke it. "Do you think Mom left anything special for us?" Jake asked casually, glancing at Mark. His tone was light, almost joking, but there was an edge to it that made Lily's stomach tighten. Mark cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. "I'm sure she did," he replied vaguely. "We'll go through everything soon." "Soon," Susan chimed in, her voice sharper than intended. She quickly softened it with a laugh. "I mean, no rush, of course. Just curious, I guess." Lily watched the exchange closely, her grip tightening on her fork. Something about the way Susan spoke set off alarm bells in her head. Was she fishing for information? And why did her dad seem so uneasy answering such a simple question? Unable to stay quiet any longer, Lily blurted out, "Why did Grandma die?" The room fell silent. Forks paused midair, and all eyes turned to her. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mark gave a weak smile and said, "It was natural causes, sweetheart. You know Grandma wasn't feeling well lately." But Lily wasn't satisfied with that answer. She reached into her bag and pulled out the diary, slamming it onto the table. "Grandma thought you were hiding something," she exclaimed, her voice trembling but firm. "She wrote about arguments and secrets, and she said not to trust you." Gasps rippled through the room. Susan's face went pale, and Greg nearly dropped his phone. Mark stared at the diary as if it were a live wire, his jaw clenched tight. "Where did you find that?" he demanded, his voice low and tense. "In Grandma's study," Lily shot back, refusing to back down. "She wrote that you were acting strange, Dad. What does that mean? What were you doing?" For a long moment, no one moved. Then Susan let out a shaky sigh and buried her face in her hands. "This isn't how it was supposed to happen," she muttered under her breath. "What are you talking about?" Lily pressed, her heart pounding. Susan hesitated, glancing at Mark as if seeking permission. When he didn't respond, she took a deep breath and confessed. "Your grandmother. She didn't die naturally," Susan admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I mean Mark, he came up with a plan. We tampered with her medication to speed things along." The words hit like a thunderclap. Lily froze, staring at her aunt in disbelief. Everyone else looked stunned too, except for Mark, whose face had turned ashen. "You poisoned her?" Lily whispered, tears welling up in her eyes. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Susan continued, her voice breaking. "We just needed the money from her estate sooner. Mark's business is failing. He said we had no choice." "No choice," Lily repeated, anger rising in her chest. "How could you do that to Grandma? She trusted you." Mark finally spoke, his voice hollow. "I didn't want to hurt her, Lily. I swear. I thought it would be quick, painless. But now..." He trailed off, unable to finish. The room erupted into chaos. Accusations flew back and forth, voices rising in anger and despair. Lily sat frozen, clutching the diary tightly as tears streamed down her face. She had uncovered the truth, but it was worse than she ever imagined.